Hey guys, my name is Priscilla Elias and today I'll talk about exposure. What is ISO, aperture, shutter speed, and most important, how do you use them to make nice pictures? First of all, I'd like to thank everyone who's been dropping me likes and who has been subscribing to my channel, and mainly to all the comments you've been sending me with questions of things you'd like to know more about. This helps me know what is important to you and what is I should focus on. I'll try to make videos answering all of those questions throughout the next weeks. When I first started shooting, I didn't know where to start with. What should I learn first? So I took my camera, I tried to snap a photo, and from there I started to understand all I had to learn. So before I start teaching you all about exposure, I believe it is important to say I always shoot in manual mode. You know, this M button at the dial of the camera. And on another video, if you want me to, I can explain what are the other modes as well. But after studying them all, I believe the manual mode works best for me because it gives me total control of all settings in the camera, and this way I can go after the exact results I'm looking for. Now, let's go to the point. Enough blah 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 blah. So first things first. What is exposure? Exposure is the amount of light that reaches your camera center. When people talk about exposure, you need to know there are three elements included on it, and those are ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. These three elements are the things that influence and that are able to change your exposure. So increasing or lowering these items changes the amount of light that comes into your sensor and therefore makes your pictures lighter or darker. Each of these have their own characteristics, and I'm going to talk about each of them today. So here we go. The first thing I check in my camera before I start shooting a session, an event, or a product is the ISO. The lower the ISO you're using, the less light you'll get into your photo. So the lower you keep your ISO, the less green you'll get into the photo. So if I'm shooting outdoors during the day, I usually have my ISO set to 100, 200 maximum. Then of course, if you go indoors, you'll realize that even if you change the other settings we'll talk about in a minute, you might still need to increase your ISO so your photo won't be too dark. I use a Canon 5D Mark IV, and I'd say if I use the ISO up to 800, I see nearly no grain at all. Up to 1600, there's a little bit of grain, but only if I really pay attention to it. From 3200 up, it starts to bother me a little, but still acceptable. But the truth is, for many newer cameras, if you use the ISO up to 16,000, it might still look great. So the tip I have for you is make a test with your camera. Shoot a photo with each ISO and see how it changes while you increase it. Then you'll also see what you believe is the limit. I myself try not to use the ISO higher than 3200, so unless I have no choice, I don't use it higher than that. But on the other hand, some people like the grainy effect to their photos, and actually some people even add them in post-production. So again, try it out and see what's acceptable for you. The aperture is the second element there is when talking about exposure. It is an opening in the lens through which the light passes to enter the camera. Complicated? Well, let's make it simple. You know the numbers photographers talk much about when they mention lenses? Oh, this is a 50mm 1.8. This is a 16 to 35mm 2.8, and so on. This 1.8 or 2.8, those are the apertures. When you read 1.8, it means the lens opens up to 1.8 to receive light. And the lower the number, the most light it'll be able to receive. So for example, a 1.8 can receive more light than a 2.8. So with a 1.8 lens, you can make brighter pictures than with a 2.8. You can make pictures in darker places without losing quality. With a 1.4, you can even get better pictures in even darker places, with a 1.2 even more, and so on. It is important to say that if you buy a 1.8, for example, the 1.8 is as bright as the lens gets, But of course you can settle your camera to make the lens receive less light if you want. The number you see on the specifications of the lens is just the maximum aperture of the lens. But you can use a 1.8 in 2.8 or 3.5 and so on. You just have to settle it in your camera. Pris, how do I know how to find the aperture when I'm playing with my camera? Different cameras have different ways of adjusting the aperture, but just play around with it and search for the F when adjusting the settings. I'm using my 5D Mark IV to film this video, but on my backup camera, which is the Canon 80D for example, here is where I set my aperture. I move the dial right to bring it down, I move left to bring it up. It is also important to say that the aperture will affect your depth of field. You've heard me talking about depth of field before, and this is the tricky thing it took me time to figure out with the aperture. The higher the aperture, or in other words, the lower the number, the greater the depth of field you'll get. In terms of results, what this means is, if you shoot with a wide open aperture in 1.8 or 1.4 for example, and you have, I don't know, 4 people in different depths of the photo, you should know you probably will be able to focus in only one of them, especially if you're close to one of them, because your aperture is very narrow when you're in wide open aperture. For that reason, when I take group photos, for example, I always try to use 2.8 or lower aperture. And remember, when I say lower aperture, I mean higher numbers. So for 2 people, I usually use 2.8. For more people, I go with about 3.5, for example. This is the third thing, you got me, the third thing to settle your exposure. The shutter speed is the length of time the camera shutter is open, exposing light onto the camera sensor. The faster the shutter speed, the shorter the time the image sensor is exposed to light. The slower the shutter speed, the longer the time the image sensor is exposed to light. If you shoot a subject that is moving, you will get different results in different shutter speeds. If you want to freeze motion, you should increase your shutter speed. If you want to catch the movement on the photo, you should decrease it. So, for example, if I'm shooting portraits in my camera, I'm usually comfortable with a 200 or higher shutter speed. If I shoot portraits at 100 of a second shutter speed, my images might not be sharp enough. You know when you get those pictures that look a little shaky, a little blurry? That's what might happen if you use lower shutter speeds. So if you want to shoot a portrait with 100 of a second shutter speed, I maybe just should use a tripod, because then I won't move the camera when I shoot, and then I'll be able to do a sharp image anyway. Now, if I want to get movement, then I decrease my shutter speed. For example, this photo was taken that way. I asked the subject not to move, and while the train passed behind him, I set my shutter speed real low, maybe 2, 3, 4 seconds. I don't remember exactly. I set my camera on a tripod and shot. So the camera took about 2, 3, 4 seconds, as much as I set it to take the photo. The camera took that time to take the photo, and during that time, the camera captured the arrival of the train, and that's how you see the movement. So you might be wondering, if I just settle one of them, I'll get the light right. Why should I care to all of them? This was my question at first when I first started photography, and this is the art to it. This is where practice makes perfection. There will be situations in which you'll have to make choices, especially, but not only, with non-professional or older cameras. Maybe you want to take a photo of a ring, for example. Then you get your macro lens, you get real close to the ring, and to get it on focus you need to have a lower aperture, maybe f7 or f11. But when you do that, you'll see the picture might be very dark because there's less light coming through the lens. So to compensate that, you'll have to play with the ISO and the shutter speed. So you'll get a higher ISO, maybe 800, 1000. You'll have to see the limits of your camera. And if the limit for you to get that photo without grain is, let's say, 1000 ISO, then the photo is still dark. Then you'll have to compensate with the shutter speed. So you'll need a lower shutter speed. And on that case, if you go under 160 or 100, if your hands are not really steady, you might not get it sharp. You might start being a little bit blurry. So you'll have to get a tripod and shoot it at 60, 50, 40th of a second, I don't know. You have to test it and see what the limits are. You see what I'm trying to say? It is all about three things: equipment, knowledge, and style. Okay, that's a lot of info, right? I'll give you a tip that might help you to start out. Of course, these are settings that work for me and my camera, but if you want, you can start from there and adapt it according to your personal taste and according to your camera and lenses as well. If I set my camera for a cloudy day, outdoors, portrait photos, I'd start with 100 ISO, 1.8 or 2.8 aperture depending on the subject and on the distance I am from it, 320 or higher shutter speed. If I set my camera for indoors, an event or a wedding, of course it will depend on the amount of light I have inside, but an average, I'd guess 800 ISO or higher, 1.8 or 2.8 depending on what I have and on the distance from the subject, 200 or lower shutter speed, and if I went lower than 160 I wouldn't breathe when taking the photo, so I wouldn't get it blurry. Ideal, I would have a flash with me on that case, and then I'd change the settings a bit, but let's keep it with no flash for now. So yeah, I've talked too much already, and this is it for now, guys. I hope this helped you understand exposure a little better. Let me know if it did, let me know if it didn't. Let me know how I can help you to be a better photographer. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and also click the notify button so you'll know when I release new videos. I'll see you in the next video. Ciao!